About to talk all things BentSpoke and how we all started this crazy adventure that we're on. Cheers. I was going to have a special guest today, but and that was Trace, my partner, my long-term partner in crime. We started our beer journey pretty well together. Fortunately, she's had something come up and had the importance she's had to attend to, so couldn't make it tonight. Later on, though, she'll be able to answer any questions if anyone's got some specific questions for her. But she's an integral part of BentSpoke. I did say last week we'd asked the question, who does all the brewing here at BentSpoke? Well, I do a little bit of the brewing, but I wouldn't say I do most of the brewing. I'm happy to say she does most of the brewing. And I think when I look back and think about what actually makes a good brewer, or what makes somebody who can churn out ridiculous numbers of different beers all the time, I think I'm looking for people that have learnt about process, have learnt that in order to do something continuously good all the time, you've got to do this, then this, then this, and keep doing that process. And I think that was something that I got taught right back at the start by Richard Pass, who was the head brewer there at the Wigan Pen back in the day. And hopefully I sort of instilled that in Trace, and she's picked it up. And I think that's one of the reasons why through our company we do churn out some okay beers. I guess thinking back in the day, we started to think about, okay, the Wigan Pen was going to shut, what were we going to do? Trace and I didn't really want to move anywhere. Tracy's got a family here. We both love living in Canberra. It's such a great place to live. What are we going to do? The Wigan Pen's going to move, maybe shut. So we decided, well, let's have a look at setting up our own brewing company. Cool. And in the end, we named it BentSpoke. We're lucky enough to partner up with some great family friends that we've met over the years, the Meddings family from Victoria, and they allowed us to achieve our dream of having our own brewery and at the start our own brew pub. We looked all around Canberra for heaps of different sites. I think we came onto this site first when it was still an old car park back in the day. We looked at the plans, didn't really suit us. We actually went away and looked at 5 or 6 different other places. Eventually we were drawn back to this place because we could actually build something from the ground up. And I think going through and designing this place, one of the first things we were lucky enough to do was actually come on site when they were building this building and put our first little mark on the site, and that was to put can lids under the reinforcing. So when you're downstairs and looking up in the brew pub, you see can lids in the ceiling. And that was our little sign that we're always going to do cans. Maybe some people have seen that and understood the journey. Maybe some people haven't seen that. But I guess that was our little sign that we were thinking a bit bigger than the brew pub. A lot of brewers, a lot of other people in the industry will always say, I've always been passionate about 2 brewing models. I've always been passionate about the first model is you have a brew pub, you have something really small, you sell beer retail, you can build a brand, you can build a customer base, you can interact with the customer, you can get feedback from the customer. And obviously the retail dollar helps you build cash flow. And the other model being the really, really big brewery where you need to be able to brew beer in such a way that you can actually make $1 from selling a keg. But you don't get any customer interaction. You don't get that smile on someone's face when they try this beer for the first time. And I think that's really important. So for me, there's 2 brewing models that work. Once you have one of those brewing models, I reckon you can go ahead and do any other brewing model you want. Oh, thanks very much. Won't it be great when we get back to pubs and we can sit here and have a pint? I'm lucky enough tonight to be in the pub having a pint of Crankshaft. Just going to have a look at some wings in front of me. In fact, they smell pretty good. I'm actually going to have a go at those. Nothing like wings where you get it everywhere. Just remember you can win a $200 merch pack by sending in a good question and we'll pick the best one and you'll win that merch pack. I guess, going back to the brew pub and starting that. When we're building the brew pub, we try to do a few different things in terms of making sure that you could see the brewing and make sure you could see everything that goes on in the brew pub. We actually have one of the best vantage points up in the brew pub upstairs here, which you can see behind me because you can see everyone in the pub. You can see down through the stairwell, you can see every seat. You can see all those expressions on people's faces, good and bad, when they tried beers for the first time. And that's one of the best things about being a brewer. We tried a few different other things. We contacted all our local bike enthusiast bike shops and got them to drop their bike parts off at the front door while we were building. And Trace and a local mob called the Rat Patrol built these beautiful lights behind us out of sprockets. Some of these little touches are what makes a really good place to enjoy a beer. In building the brew pub, we also worked out that the handrail specialist was using the same pipe that we used to do the brewing. So we thought, well, why don't we set it up so we can run beer through our handrails? So if you ever come into the brew pub and look at our handrails, they both start and finish in the brewing areas, upstairs, downstairs. We can actually run beer through our handrails. Just another little touch, a little bit of bent feel we bring to the BentSpoke brew pub. I guess at some point we had to do our first brew. And I did say we'd be tasting the Dick Tracy here tonight, so be great to, if I can have a pint of Dick Tracy, please, that'd be awesome. So our first brew back in the day, we're running around, we've got all these tradies just everywhere in the pub, constantly turning the power off. We couldn't do anything. So come up to Easter, I said to Trace, why don't we come in and brew on Good Friday? There's not going to be anyone around. We're going to be able to come in, get our first brew down without worrying about any interruptions. So we made sure the front door was locked. We got the brewery all water tested. We came into the brew pub, and what we did was we didn't have the auger. Thanks very much. Cheers. We didn't have the auger sorted, so we had to grind grain into bags and lift it up and pour it into the lauter tun. We didn't have any clue how much water to use, so our first brew we actually overflowed our lauter tun. Our lauter tun's actually 18 hectolitre or 1800 litres, so we made it a lot bigger than our kettle at 1200 litres because we wanted to have a brewery that could make really good big beers. And I guess that's allowed us to develop beers like Cluster 8, like Cluster 12. I'd love to get that in a can, maybe someday. Cluster 16, Cluster 18, our Descent, which is our Imperial Stout. Having a really big mashed lauter tun allows us to put all that extra grain in and really, get all that extra sugar and make those big beers. But we overflowed it first time. We didn't even get all the grain in the end. But what happened was we ended up getting a really good, nice wort flowing through to the kettle. It was really good colour. We actually got the brew into the fermenter. We fermented it. Even though that was on Easter Friday in April and we didn't open till the 6th of June, the beer just conditioned away. And when we actually opened and that beer came out, it was tasting so good, having 8 weeks of maturation, dry hopped. It's also a bit of a forgotten style as well. I think we might have our first question. Might go to a question before I talk a bit more about the beer.
From David Horn. Hey guys, love your on-site hand pump beers. Can they be canned?
Hand pump beers or real ales, really interesting beers. I was lucky enough at the Wig and Pen that we had 4 cask ales on tap all the time. And the whole process about cask ales is that you're conditioning in the cask. So you're putting the beer into a cask, you're conditioning in the cask, and then you hand pump that beer to the bar. So you're using no pressure, you're actually using a hand pump to bring that beer from the cask through to the tap. Sometimes you might use a sparkler to create some foam, but generally speaking, these beers are pretty really lowly carbonated, and all the flavour is from all the malt or all the hops that you've used, and the carbonation is kept to a low level. I think we'd have a lot of issues probably trying to can these beers because they do have really low carbonation levels, and canning, you really rely on some of that carbonation to purge the can of some of the oxygen. So I'd love to have some of those real ales in a can as well, but I think those real ales, like the words themselves, real ale, are best drunk on draft, hand pumped straight into your glass and served in the brew pub. So if you really want really good hand pump beer, I'd head off to a pub that serves hand pump beer. So our very first beer that we brewed was an American-style brown ale. Originally, back in the day, we gave it a bit of a twist. We actually put a Belgian yeast into it, and we thought we'd do a Belgio hoppy brown ale, something a bit different, like all our first 6 beers were. I guess over time, we realised how lacking that American brown ale was in the Australian beer market, and how little options there were for people to taste that style. So we actually morphed it into the American brown ale. Still a really forgotten style. Still has a really deep chocolatey brown colour, really malty sort of body to it, but you still get that big whack of hops, American style hops. I think we're using Citra, Mosaic, and I think we got some Galaxy in this one as well. The first sips I get on this are really those resinous hops that you get. A little bit of fruit as well, but more that resinous sort of dank hop character coming through. It's actually a beer that does allow a fair bit of bitterness as well. So this beer is probably over 50 IBU as well. So it's got a really refreshing, cleansing bitterness. A nice bit of chocolate malt on the palate really does work well with that dankness or a little bit of that fruit. You even get a little bit of that pudding character in the beer. About 6% alcohol, so it's pretty clean, pretty sessionable. I like to think 6% beers are sessionable. We made our most popular beer, Crankshaft 5.8, and for that reason that you can have that real good malty backbone and still be able to put a lot of hops into it as well. For me, the brew pub is and always will be the heart and soul of BentSpoke. It's just something that's really special. That interaction with the customer, that conversation that you're allowed to have with the customer at the source. The customer feels at home as well, because the beer that they're drinking is literally come from tanks about 2 metres away. So the beer is always fresh. We've been really thankful for all our customers at the moment in COVID, still coming down to the brew pub and actually buying some of the travellers. We've got 25 different beers on tap at the moment. We've got a whole massive range of beers, our biggest range ever, and it's great to see people coming down to the brew pub and still willing to give all these different beers a go. I think we might have another question.
This question's from Sam. He asks, what's Canberra's water quality like for brewing?
Yeah, really good question, Sam, because water, as you know, is 95% of beer, so it's really important that we have a really good water supply. We're lucky in Canberra that our water comes to us from the mountains. It flows through the limestone plains, and these limestone plains naturally filter out a lot of the harsher compounds that are in water. So for us, we get really soft water in Canberra. We actually add a lot of calcium sulphate back into our beer, which helps promote the hop flavour. We also add a lot of calcium chloride back into our beer as well, which builds that roundness of flavour, allowing us to carry those big bold flavours we try and put in our beers. So yeah, the water in Canberra is really good for brewing beer. And I think not just us, but Zeerholz, Capital Brewing in Canberra are making really good beers. So I think there must be something in the water in Canberra. Another question.
From Richard Tuffin. Hi Richard, I've seen you at events hosted by other Canberra brewers and breweries. How cooperative is the local brewer and beer community? Seems like they're a pretty good mob.
Yeah, that's really good question, Richard. We, as brewers, we like to hang out with brewers. So, we're not sitting in the inner west with 50 brewers around and having people pop into your breweries all the time. So we're a reasonably tight sort of network in Canberra. We're all pretty busy. We've all got our own brewing worlds going on, but we try and catch up as much as possible. The Capital guys might drop some beers off to us in the brew pub, and we reciprocate. We always bounce ideas off. We've had to go and borrow some of Capital's equipment from time to time because ours is broken down. They've done the same. We've lent them grain. They've lent us grain. We've swapped hops. I'm not sure what else we haven't done together really, probably apart from make a beer, but maybe Lawrence from Capital will need to answer that question about making a beer. Another question?
George asks, I know you don't necessarily follow the trends, but what do you think is the next big thing in the craft beer?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and maybe we're trying to set the trend because I really believe that sour beers or beers with bacteria, beers that require extra process, require extra time, also beers that you can't actually plan what they're going to taste out like in the future. I think that's going to be the next big thing. But what that means is that for people to brew those beers and get them to the consumers on a more regular sort of basis, breweries are going to have to invest in barrels, in ways to age those beers with bacteria. And I think that that's a good question because it probably leads straight on to what else I was going to talk about today, and that is what's going to be new for BentSpoke. And I think I spoke about last week with our phlegm how we've done all these sour beers, and we released the phlegm, which is the Flanders Red Ale, which has got the Brettanomyces character, and I'd love to continue that forward. But one thing we're not able to do because we just don't have the facility is spontaneous fermentation. And one of the things I really want to do is look at spontaneous fermentation, and we don't have the facility to do that. So I'm looking at trying to use different sources to try and get that spontaneous fermentation. So we've been lucky enough to partner up with some really good friends of ours, and they run a company down in Victoria called Mount Zero Olives, Richard Seymour and his family, and they've been lucky enough to give us some of their olive brine, some of the brine that they use to pickle or age their olives. And if you think about what happens with olives, they're on the tree, they're picking up all those wild yeasts and bacteria, they then go into brine and age away. And we want to use that brine to make some beer using that really natural yeast that's available on those olives. So I don't think anyone's made beer from olive brine in Australia yet. So I'm pretty keen to give that a go for two reasons. I love olives and I love the flavour of olives, but I also really want to work with that wild yeast and bacteria that's on the olives. And when we received this 1,000 litres of olive brine, the crust on top, or the pellicule on top of that wild yeast foaming away is like, it's already looking amazing. It's already reminds me of looking into one of our barrels and seeing that real thick cheesy mould on top. So I'm really looking forward to grabbing some of that and making a beer with some of that and using those natural bacteria that are on the olives. We've had a lot of questions recently. We actually did some broadcast back in February when we actually had to change our can lid, but and we love our 360-degree lids. Trace and I were over in the US and we fell in love with them back in 2012. Well before we even canned our beer, and we were always going to use them. They're bloody expensive. They make the cost of a carton of beer to us so much more expensive to make. But for me, they are all about what we're about. They're something different. They allow you to see the beer, they allow you to smell the beer, they allow you to taste the beer so much better than out of a normal ring pull top. You don't get that glug feel, you just get it's like you're drinking out of an aluminium cup. And unfortunately, we've had a few roadblocks put in our way. We've had problems now getting supply of them. The US is going through some interesting times, and the supplier over in the US has decided not to make them anymore. So we're really struggling to get them. We're going to start to look at our own innovation paths and try and come up with our own can lid. And that's just going to take time. It's going to take a little bit of money. And unfortunately, in this COVID situation we're in, as a business and a company, we're doing okay, but we're not doing as well as we were before it all started. So we're just being a little bit careful on what we spend our money on at the moment. The other thing the problem we've got is that New South Wales has decided that our can lid is non-compliant now. So we won't be able to sell our beer into New South Wales from early next year. And that's a really big problem for me. As you know, we've got the CDS scheme in New South Wales, which we all have to abide by now. They charge us 10 cents a can. And the CDS scheme is run by all the big brewers, all the major soft drink companies, and it's basically there to facilitate recycling of cans. They've deemed our lid to be detachable, and the contribution to the litter stream is so much that they've decided that our can lid is now non-compliant. Can you believe that in all of the cans that are produced in New South Wales, all of the twist tops from Stubbies, that BentSpoke's can lids, Colonial's can lids, Pioneer's can lids, and I think Edge Brewing are using them as well, 4 breweries in Australia will contribute so much to the litter stream in New South Wales, way more than all the PET bottle lids, way more than all the stubby tops, way more than all the traditional ring pulls. Can you believe that they've deemed our lid to be non-compliant? We're not giving up lightly. We are going to fight it. It's ridiculous. If you go out to the litter stream, you'd never find one of our lids. You'd find 20,000 PET bottles, PET lids. But, of course, Coca-Cola, CUB, Lion Nathan, they're all part of the CDS scheme. So how are we supposed to work in this situation when those companies are deeming our lid to be non-compliant, yet their own lids contribute way more to the litter stream? So if anyone would like to help us fight or got some great ideas, hit us up. We'd love some help on this. We can't do this alone. We've been forced to change our can lid. The beer hasn't changed though. Your experience tasting the beer has changed because it does taste different drinking out of a normal can. Unfortunately, I'm going to tell you to pour it into a glass now because drinking out of a normal can, it does taste different because you can't smell it. If you get any other beer, in fact, I'd like you to do a test. If you get any other beer that you're fond of, it doesn't have to be BentSpoke, any other beer, and you close your nose and go and drink it, it'll taste so much different to if you have the your smell available. So go and close your nose and taste anything, whether it's carbonara, whether it's a glass of wine or a beer, it's going to taste way different with your nose closed. And that's the problem with drinking out of normal cans. You're not getting that same BentSpoke experience, and that's why the perception is that our beer's changed. In actual fact, our beer hasn't changed at all. We've refined our process. I reckon our beer is better now than it probably was 6 months ago because we're getting better as a company in terms of our process. So there's my little rant. Let's go back to the fun stuff. I think we've got another question.
From Justin Taylor, beyond reopening the pub, what do you look forward to post-COVID-19 lockdown?
Well, I'd love to have a few people sitting next to me having a beer. It's nothing like, building a pub. It's all about having a chat. It's all about that conversation you have over beer. So I feel lonely sitting here right now. Trace was going to be here tonight. She couldn't make it. But I'm sitting here by myself. So it's heartbreaking to sit in your pub by yourself and have to talk to people through a camera. I'd love to be sitting in the pub, having the banter that goes on with the guys, a few cheeky remarks to the staff over the bar. That's what the pub's all about. It's that community. It's about bringing people together. It's a place where people can come, share the highlights of their day, their life. At the same time, talk about things they got going on in their lives as well. And I love coming down to the pub and sitting here and having a beer with all sorts of people. And we've got a really good community around BentSpoke. We always get great support from our local community. Our local drafters or membership are always coming in. We thank those drafters at the moment, especially for coming in and filling up their flask and supporting us in this time. I'd love to be able to shout the bar. And when we get to opening, who knows, maybe I'll do that. Next question.
From George, I know you don't necessarily follow the trends.
George, I think we might have already answered that question. My back of house teams are just fiddling through a couple of questions. We'll get to them. We'll get to the next question soon.
From Nathan, what is the most difficult style of beer to get right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In fact, I replied to a message last night about that, funnily enough, and I would like to make a bit of a shout out to Richard Pass, who was my first head brewer at the Wigan Pen, and he posted a picture last night on his feed saying that he was enjoying a great Marzen or Oktoberfest lager, and he was a really great brewer of lager. I mean, he was a great brewer of any style, to be fair, but lager was a style of beer that's he really perfected, and I really did learn a lot from him about process back then. And lager is all about process. I really think that everything needs to be absolutely dialed up to 99% when you're trying to make a really good lager. Not only do you need to source the best ingredients that you possibly can to make the best lager, you need to make sure your process is super tight. You need to make sure your quality control is absolutely spot on. Getting that really good beer tasting super out of the fermenter and into the bright tank, getting it from the bright tank into that can. Every little process step or every little process addition contributes to that beer. So for me, it's perfecting a really good lager. And I think we've done okay with our Malts Gold. I think that we can still do a lot of work with that and still make it a much better beer. I certainly enjoy drinking in the middle of summer, especially just after I've made the lawn, but I'd really like to see lager appreciated for what it is. Unfortunately, I think we've been blinded a lot in Australia with lager, and I think we've been sort of blinded by the bigger breweries in terms of producing lager that's really nondescript and doesn't really showcase the flavours that lager should. So I think be really good to see. I'd love to have a lager festival and just the only beers available would be lagers, because I think it would really bring breweries out of their shell. It'd really show what breweries are really got tight processes, worry about their ingredients, and I think that's something maybe we'll look at doing when we all open up and we can all get together again. Another question.
Where do you source your hops from for the Reflector?
So yeah, I guess that's a hop that we use some wet hops in from Victoria. So they came from Ross Trevor. Good friend of mine, Michael Capaldo, who works for HPA Hops, looks after our hops, our Australian hops, and he managed to source some really nice hops from Victoria and Ross Trevor, pretty close to Myrtleford. And we're lucky to get those pretty well in 36 hours. We brew this Reflector every year. We only get one chance to brew this wet hop beer. You've really got to use wet hops as quickly as you get them. And it's all about using those hops really straight, wet, straight out of the box effectively. You hope that you get them cold, but they really do start breaking down, just like your compost does. You put your hand into that box of hops and they're already starting to go warm in the middle, so you want to get those straight into the hot side. So we've got this hop back that we use. It's actually over my shoulder in the background there, and we chuck those hop flowers in our hop back. And the key part is that you're using those flowers, releasing all those oils on the hot side, and you're getting those hops straight from the vine, picked the day before, straight into the brewery. So you've got to basically grow your own hops at home if you want to try and emulate that beer. Another question.
This is from Sarah. She says, "Hi Richard, us ladies, and what offers have you got to keep it simple for Dad on Mother's Day?"
Simple for Dad on Mother's Day. Yeah, well, thanks Sarah. Mother's Day, well, hopefully we find out some good news tomorrow and we can have a few people around. BentSpoke, we've got a nice little special going. You can get some beautiful slow cooked lamb. We're gonna, if you buy some lamb, we've got a few beer deals going as well. So you can pick up a mixed 4-pack. I personally would recommend a Traveller of Dick Tracy, and that'll match really well with that slow cooked lamb, those roast veggies, and that beautiful gravy that we've got to offer. Another question.
From Lawrence Kane. Where is your beard, Richard?
Yeah, I know. It's amazing how quickly you can grow a beard, Lawrence. It just, for me, I can grow a beard, in a few days. So, yeah, I got rid of that. I've sort of got the beanie on tonight to keep me warm. But big shout out to Lawrence. Lawrence from Capital Brewing, doing a great job over there at Capital. I think we're talking weekly about the situation we're in and trying to share ideas and come up with plans. And Lawrence, you might be able to fill everyone in online when we're going to do that collab. Another question.
What sort of malts do you use?
Yeah, malts. What sort of malts do we use? So we're lucky. Like when you're coming up with a recipe, you've got to look at all the different ingredients that you can use. And sure, we have one water supply. We can adapt the water with different minerals to get to emulate different waters around the world. If you want to, try and emulate a water of, say, Ireland, you might add a lot of calcium carbonate to the water. Same with Same with Brussels. Maybe a bit more calcium sulfate. Water in Brussels is pretty calcium high as well as carbonate high. Having said that, if you go across to Czechoslovakia and Pilsen, the water's really soft there, a lot like Canberra. So the other thing you can do is you've got 65 to 100 different hops available to use. You've got all these different yeasts. There's crazy amount of different yeasts available. And then malts. So we're lucky that we have so many different malting companies around the world and access to all these different malts in Australia. We've got access to malts from the UK, we've got access to malts from Germany, we've got access to malts from Belgium, from the US. So we use malts from all around the world. If we want to make a really good Belgian double, we'll use Belgian malts. We'll even use some really rare Belgian hops like Aramis to make that beer, a Belgian yeast. In the UK, if we want to make some English styles, we'll use some Great Marisota or some Golden Promise. So we try and source different malts from around the world to make make the different beer styles we want to. For the beers we're going to be making all the time, we definitely try and use something consistent. So we try and use some local Australian malt. So we've got some great barley from Joe White Malting's company, and it's really consistent barley. It really does attenuate really well. It really converts that starch into sugar really well. And that allows us brewers to really focus on our process and not have to worry about those ingredients. So to answer your question, we use malts from all around the world, but for all our big selling beers like Crankshaft, Barley Griffin, Easy, Sprocket, Red Nut, we try and use local malts that pretty well come from the Riverina district. I think we might have time for one more question, and then we might head off for the night.
From Richard Tuffin, if I can ask a second question, what are the flavour qualities of a good lager beer that you enjoy most?
Yeah, we talked about lager a bit earlier. So for me, lager is all about appreciating those really delicate aromas. When you're actually judging lager, which is something I try and do every time I go to a beer competition, because I find that it's really challenging. It's really pushes you as a judge to really dissect that beer and be able to award it a medal or not a medal. I really want a really clean, delicate aroma. I really want no sort of off flavours at all. Sometimes the big, heavier, hoppier beers can carry some of those unwanted flavours. I also want a really good balance on the palate. I want a really good balance between bitterness and the malt. I still want some malt there, but I really want some bitterness. And I really want a super dry finish. I want that beer to go down and feel like you really haven't had a beer. And then that really prompts you to have that next sip. And that's what gets you into a lager. It's got to be that beer that you go, oh wow, this smells really good, this tastes really good. And then you finish it and you go, oh, I better try that again. So that's what I'm sort of looking for in a lager. So yeah. Have we got time for one more? I'm getting a signal, I think, that I've got one more. Maybe not. All right. So thanks very much for Bent Brewers Live, the Brew Pub Session Part 1. Next week, tomorrow we might hear about what's happening with our pubs. So tomorrow we might actually hear that we're going to allow people back in our pubs at some point. So for next week in the Bent Brewers Live session, it was going to be our hop session Part 1, but it may well be our Brew Pub Session Part 2. I'd love to do this session with 100 people sitting around me, all having a beer, all chatting about what they've been up to through this COVID. This is what the Brew Pub's all about, and if we're open next week, we'll be doing Brew Pub 2. If I'm sitting here next week, I think we'll be doing Hop Season Part 1. And this time around, I've got a couple of international guests that I'm planning on bringing on the show, so please tune in next week where we talk all things hops, and we talk about another special beer that's in the making for BentSpoke. Cheers again.